Hi all, welcome back to the session, and we'll be covering reading number 46 now. Okay, and this particular reading is also like a very simple theoretical, but it gives you a understanding of how do you plan a portfolio or how do you construct a portfolio. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so we had seen that previously that we have to uh, write a investment policy statement for a client. Okay, now what is the recommendation is that investment policy statement should not be verbal. Okay, it should be written. Okay, so you should have a written investment policy statement, or IPS should be like documented, and you have to get the sign of the client as well as you have to sign the document, so that you have an agreement as what has been decided and how the portfolio will be executed. Okay, so what we have is IPS is the starting point. So once you have the discussion with the client, you create a IPS is just the starting point of the association with the client. Okay, now we say that it is not possible to achieve the client's objective without understanding the requirement. Okay, so IPS should not be verbal. Okay, and in this IPS, okay, why you create IPS, and that to written IPS, okay, it needs you to determine whether the investment, so let's say you have done some investment, so IPS was verbal, so verbally the client has said that okay, I am a risk taker and you can invest my money in let's say futures and options. Okay, and let's say you lose a lot of money in futures and options, the next day, the next month client comes and say that you have lost a lot of my money, I will go to the court. Okay, you have not dealt my money properly. So what you have is, if you have an IPS which is written, okay, so you can determine whether the investment that was done, whether was done as per the IPS or not. Okay, this is for you. Okay, or as a because what happens is many times you come up with some good opportunity. Okay, so let's say I have come up with a good stock of buying opportunity of stock A. Okay, now what I feel is this stock A is very risky, the standard deviation is very high. Okay, now this stock A may not be suitable in some client, let's say C1 client it is suitable, for C2 client it is not suitable. Okay, so I cannot invest C2 clients money in stock A, but how do I keep track of whether it is suitable for C1 or not, or whether it's suitable for C2 or not? So IPS acts as a reference document. Okay, whether I should invest in a stock, whether IPS allows me to invest in that stock or not. Okay, so this is for you as a portfolio manager, it will help you in investment. Okay, also the client can see. Okay, so you have created a portfolio of the client will go through the performance statement that you have given, so he will see whether you have created the portfolio. Okay, whether you have created the portfolio as per the requirement or not. Okay, now, okay, if let's say you are managing a portfolio of a client. Okay, so you are working in a big firm, you are working in a big XYZ firm, and you are managing portfolio of a client A, let's say. Okay, now you decide to leave that company and you want to move to another company ABC. Okay, now if the client is sticking to that firm, okay, somebody who is replacing you, he should understand that whatever decision that you have taken, what are those decisions, why you have taken that, right? So it is helps in the continuity of the portfolio, like helps the company in managing the portfolio for that particular client if you leave, or if that portfolio manager leaves the firm. Okay, if you do not have a written IPS, if you do not have proper documentation, how that person, how the new fund manager will know that whether the on what basis these investments were done. Okay, and the fourth case is what we discussed, that is in case of any dispute, in case that the client is not agreeing with whatever investment you have done. Okay, he can take that matter to the court. So what you have is, like, in the court, IPS comes as a document which is legally binding, because it is being signed by you, it is signed by your client, so that means client has understood whatever the construction you have done or you are planning to do. so it acts as a reference. It is a legal document, so in case of dispute you can produce. So it's not necessary that you have to go to the court. So clients can come and say that this performance is not good, what is the reason, so you can show him that this is what was agreed as per IPS. If the client doesn't understand, then and he moves to the court, then you can show this type of evidence in the court also. Okay, so that's why whenever you are dealing with any client, make sure the IPS is written, it's properly documented, take the signature, and whatever changes you are doing in the IPS, it should also be documented. Okay, CFA Institute recommend that an IPS should be reviewed annually, because every year you will you can have some changes in the circumstances, the goals, objectives, things can change, so you have to review the IPS at least annually, but it can be more frequent also. Okay, think about a person has got married, right? So he has now new requirement. A person has a new member in the family, he has got kids, so you have again some new requirement, the requirements have changed. So ensure that whenever this some new things is happening, you go and update the IPS, you discuss with the client, update it, get the client's consent, okay, and then execute the portfolio accordingly. Okay, so this is the, like, we have to write the IPS. Okay, we should have a written IPS. Any question? Okay, now let's see in a IPS what are the various components that you have in an IPS. So if you see like a firms, okay, there are like let's say Morgan Stanley Wealth Management or RBS Wealth Management, they have they have a standard format, their own format for IPS, but ideally all of these IPS, okay, should be like generally should be adhering to this format. So what you have is, in the first you have an introduction. So in this introduction you will say that who is the client, okay, you will give some details about the client, his age, his what type of work he is doing, okay, some type of history, okay, maybe like you will mention whether what is his investment history, whether okay, he is has invested earlier, all those basic uh, information of the client would be mentioned over here. Okay, then you have to mention the statement of purpose, that is why the client wants to get into the investment, why they have come to you, and what is the purpose that client want to achieve, what are the goal that the client want to achieve through association with you. Okay, then next is you have to give the statement of duties and responsibilities of each party, that is what is the duty of client, what is the duty of a portfolio manager or wealth manager, what is the responsibility of client, what is the responsibility of wealth manager. Okay, so it should be like be as objective as possible, so that there is no scope of any ambiguity over here, because like later people have a tendency to come back and say that this was not my duty, and like you were waiting for me to do this, it is not acceptable. Make sure that you properly write, has to be like in clear language, it should not be like any ambiguous language, so that any layman can also understand whatever is being written in the IPS. Okay, then you have a process. Okay, what are the procedure that would be adopted when IPS is being, or when the client's portfolio is being executed. So whatever the process your firm is following, you have to mention over here. So whatever the procedure you have, you should mention. Okay, then what are the investment objective. Okay, so what will happen is the clients will have some investment objective. Okay, so objective can be like in terms of the return requirement. So the clients will have that my objective is to generate 15% return every year. So you can mention that, okay, this is the objective. Okay, so you can have objectives, will see it can be in terms of return objective, it can be in terms of risk objective. Okay, but the idea is that you ensure that you put the objectives of the client over here. Okay, maybe objectives, or you can also have some goals of the client. Okay, so goals can be, okay, I want to get my daughter married in another 15 years, so I should have sufficient money for her marriage. Okay, so such type of objectives can also be mentioned by the clients. Okay, then once you have these objectives, it's what happens is people will have thousand of objectives. So people will have an objective of I want a return of 1000%. I will have a return of 1000%. Okay, but it is not possible to generate that objective, right? So you have certain constraints which will prohibit you from achieving those type of objectives. So you have to highlight what are the constraints that are there. So we will see that there are some constraints, like what are constraints will be like liquidity constraint, there will be tax constraints. Okay, so there are some unique constraints. We'll see all of these in the subsequent learning outcome statements. So you have to mention what are the constraints. Okay, so these objectives and constraints you will be only able to get once you have got the discussion, once you have discussed with the client. Okay, so you probe the client, you ask questions, so that you have to become very clear on these objectives and constraints. So you have become very clear, okay, what is their requirement, what are their constraints, and then once you have the objective and constraint, you come up with the investment guideline, that is how or what are the guidelines, or what all securities or what are asset classes the investment will be done. Okay, you can say that client is very risk averse, he does not want to invest in risky securities, so you can say that no investment will be done in derivatives, no investment will be done in hedge fund, no investment will be done in small cap stock. So some guidelines you will come up, whatever these guidelines, it will be mentioned in this particular section. Okay, then evaluation and review. So you will have how the evaluation, so you will have metrics on what constrain the portfolio evaluation. So you will have like, okay, portfolio will be evaluated on these parameters. Okay, and portfolio will be reviewed on, maybe you can be as specific as these dates we will review, or you can put, okay, monthly will be reviewing the portfolio. So whatever the evaluation and the review criteria you will be mentioning over here. Okay, and this IPS is supported by appendix. Okay, you can have lots of item in the appendix, but ensure that at least you will be having these two items. Okay, one is your strategic asset allocation. So once you have objective, constraints, this investment guideline is known, you can come up with a strategic asset allocation for the client. That means you will say that, okay, for this client strategically the debt should be 40%. Or you can say that, okay, for this client strategically the equity would be 40%. Okay, you can put this, and you can say that, okay, real estate will be 10%. Okay, and let's say the venture capital investment will be 10%. Like that you have to come up with a strategic asset allocation. Okay, please know that strategic allocation is like depending on all of these, and then you have to come up with, typically we do not have one particular values, but what we have is we have a range of values. So you will say that, okay, debt will be between 30 to 50, equity will be between, let's say, 30 to 60, like that way you will be giving the strategic asset allocation. Typically a range is being given. Okay, now you also have to ensure that you mention what is known as rebalancing policy. Now what is rebalancing? Okay, we will let me cover this particular concept. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me try to cover this concept of rebalancing. Okay, think about you have created a portfolio for a client, and you are saying that the strategic asset allocation should be, so strategic asset allocation, you have said that debt should be 40 and equity should be 60. So 60% is equity and 40% is debt. Okay, and let's say that you have invested $100 of the client, so you have invested $100 of the client. Okay, so $100 investment, how much will be in debt? Okay, so what you will have is you will have debt as 40, so this will be debt. Okay, how much will be in the equity? 60%. So in the equity you will have 60. So let's say this is on 1st Jan 2010. Okay, assume that it was on 1st Jan 2010. Okay, now what will happen typically? Okay, typically what happens is the debt returns are lower than the equity returns. Okay, assuming that in first year the debt has given 10% return. Okay, so how much the debt has given return? Let's say it has given a return of 10%. Equity has given a return, very high return. It was a great year, and equity has given a return of 25%. Okay. Now what will happen over here? After 1 year, how much will be the value of debt? 10% is the return, 40 was the initial amount. Can I say that the value of the debt will be 44? Okay. How much will be the value of equity? 25% return on 60, 15 is the return, 60 plus 15 is 75. So you had invested $100. Okay. How much is this? 54911. So it is 119. So what has happened is you have given like around 19% return for the client. You have given 19% return. Okay. Now let's try to find out the weight. How much is the weight of debt over here? Can I say it will be 44 by 119? How much it will be? Will it be 40% or will it be lower than 40%? Can I say it will be lower than 40%? Right? So it will be lower than 40%. So if you compute, just you can give me some numbers. Okay, so just I do not have my calculator over here. It is 0.37. So the debt is 0.37. So can I say that the equity will be 0.63? Now what you had was, you had said that equity should be 60, debt should be 60, but debt has become equity has become 63. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to ensure that you make the weight of equity as 63. So what you are 60, sorry. So what you will do is you will have weight as 60. So how much if you are doing weight as 60? Can I say that roughly you will put 72 should be the value of equity. Okay, and the value of debt should be roughly 47. So what you will do is you will sell. How much debt you will sell? Or you will buy debt? So you will buy debt plus 3, you will sell equity minus 3, you will sell. Okay, and as a result what will happen is your debt has become 47 and your equity has become 72. Okay, now you can see that okay, this is 40% and this is 60%. So what you are doing is you are rebalancing the portfolio as per the strategic asset allocation. Okay, whatever the strategic asset allocation, you are rebalancing as per that. Now if you see every day the value return of debt and equity will be different, right? Now you are not doing this rebalancing every day, because if you are doing rebalancing every day, what will happen is you have to buy debt, you have to sell equity, there is a cost associated with a transaction cost, brokerage, taxes you have to pay. So what typically you have in the IPS, you will mention about the rebalancing policy. Okay, so you will say that okay, the rebalancing will be done every 6 months or rebalancing will be done every 1 year. So you will mention that when all rebalancing will be done. Okay, also what you will have is, let's say within a year. Okay, so you have said that okay, rebalancing is done every 6 months, but what happens is in such that what has happened is, let's say the equity has given a case where equity has given negative 50% return and debt has given 10% return. Okay, it is an extreme divergent, right? So you have to also give the tolerance level. Okay, you say that rebalancing will be done every 6 months. However, if at any point of time equity has fallen below 55 or equity has gone above 65, then we will rebalance, even though it is before 6 months. Is it clear? Okay, so you can put this like whenever equity has fallen less than 55 or equity has gone greater than 65, we will do rebalancing. Okay, even if 6 months has not been achieved or 6 months has not passed. Okay, so this is what you have to write it in the document, write it in the IPS. Okay, yes, it is a fund manager's responsibility to rebalance the client's portfolio. Okay, so that it is adhering to the strategic asset allocation. Is it clear? Yes, so rebalancing is aligning the portfolio to the originally agreed on the SAA. Okay, so you should align your portfolio. So rebalancing is done to align your portfolio on whatever strategic asset allocation you had decided. Okay. So in the appendix you will mention about the strategic asset allocation, you will mention about the rebalancing policy, that is what is the frequency that you will be doing and when you will be doing if the frequency has not come. Okay, that means what is the range beyond which it goes, you will be forced to rebalance. Okay, now The next learning outcome statement is about the risk and the return objective. Okay, so we said that over here in this IPS we have, you have to get an understanding of the objectives of the client. So the objectives are, there are two type of objectives. One is risk objective and another is return objective. Okay, now this risk objective can be divided into two parts. One is absolute risk objective and another is relative risk objective. Okay, what about absolute risk objective? Here you are only focused for the client's portfolio. Okay, or the client is only focused on his portfolio. He is not comparing with anybody. Okay, so in absolute risk objective we can have decrease in absolute percentage value. So we are talking about the risk. The client is concerned about the risk. So risk is a decrease in the value of the portfolio is a risk, right? So he says that the portfolio should not decrease in value below a certain amount, okay, in some time period. So one example is no decrease in value below $10,000 in a year. Okay, or you can also specify as percentage value. So example will be no decrease in value by more than 5% in a year period. So this is what the client has stated as his risk objective. Are you able to follow this? Okay. So you can also have risk objective stated in terms of probability. Okay, so you can say that, okay, there should not be more than 5% probability of getting return less than -2% in a year. So you specify that what is the probability you are happy with, or you do not want a more than this. So you are saying that the probability of a decrease less than 2%, -2% should not be more than 5%. You are able to tolerate till this 5%, okay, but you do not want a probability more than this. Okay, so we have done this probability. This is like kind of a, what happens is the investment manager has to understand the distribution of the returns and they have to find out this probability. So when we do the reading number 9 and 10 of the quantitative, we will be able to understand how this probability is being determined. Okay, we will be able to determine this probability. We'll see it. Okay, so not more than 5% probability of getting return less than -2 in 1 year. Okay, another is, this is like with respect to the percentage loss in the portfolio. You can also have the absolute loss. You can say that not more than 5% probability of loss more than certain amount in a year. Okay, so you want ideally to be very less. This probability should be very less, right? So this is, we are talking about the absolute risk objective, wherein the client is only thinking about his portfolio. But many times the client may think about the portfolio relative to some other. Okay, maybe relative to some other guy's portfolio, relative to some index, benchmark. So what you have is, you have relative risk objective. It is stated with respect to benchmark. So I have given some example over there. Okay, so what we are saying is, the client is saying that ensure that the return that you provide should not be lower than certain index. Okay, so here we have taken, it should not be lower than the Nifty index. Okay, so this is what you are saying is, should not be, if Nifty is producing 10%, I should generate at least 10%. So 10 plus I should want. Okay, the clients can also say that return should not be lower than Nifty index by 2%. Okay, so this is also a risk objective. If let's say sometime what happens is, you generate return more than Nifty, sometimes you generate return less than Nifty. Okay, so what you are saying is, if in case you are generating return less than Nifty, but I do not want a Nifty return less than 2%. Okay, now when you are saying it's not lower than Nifty, Ali is saying that why not we mimic the portfolio. Please note that if you mimic the portfolio, you will get the return like Nifty. You will not be able to beat Nifty also, right? So what happens is, in investment you have some period wherein you are beating, some period you are getting beaten, right? And on average you want to beat this index. Okay, whatever is your benchmark, you want to beat. If you mimic, you are not adding any value you can put like in your passive fund. So mimicking many people do, and that is your passive investment. Okay, and in fact people who are believing in efficient market hypothesis, they are saying that passive management will yield better result than active management. Okay, another thing, you can specify the relative risk objective as not more than 5% probability of return lower than the Nifty index. So you are saying that, okay, I have some chances. So you are an advisor, you are saying that, look, I have some chances that I can return lower than the Nifty, and you say that make sure that the return, the probability of returning lower than Nifty is not more than 5%. So restrict that probability to be low, less than 5%. Okay, so this is your risk objective. So here everywhere we have talked in terms of portfolio value, portfolio return. Okay, but whenever we are talking about the return, what we are saying is not more than this, not decrease in this. We are concerned that the return can be lower. We are concerned that the value losses can be more. So that is why even though we are talking about return, actually we are talking about the risk objective. So nowhere we have talked about the standard deviation. Okay, but yes, this is a risk objective. So some people can also specify risk objective as I should not have a standard deviation more than 20%. So the portfolio should not have a standard deviation more than 20%. Okay. However, such type of thing usually does not work, because what we see is if you take higher risk, you will get higher return. So remember, we had seen the Sharpe ratio. Okay, in Sharpe ratio, what we were doing is we are computing the risk adjusted return. Okay, so what we say is you should look in for the risk adjusted return, just rather than specifying that you do not want more than 15%, 20% standard deviation. Think about if you are taking that much, so whether the Sharpe ratio is more than the lower risk investment or not. Okay, now the second part of this LOS will be focusing on the return objective. So we'll be trying to understand what is a return objective. So similar to the risk objective, we also have return objective can be absolute. Return objective can be relative. Okay, if return objective is absolute, what I say is, okay, I am specifying a return objective. Okay, my portfolio should have a return of 10%. Okay, or you can specify my portfolio should have a return greater than 10%. This is your return objective. Okay, you can also specify relative return objective. You can specify that I want a return more than Nifty, or I want a return certain percentage more than the benchmark. So this is one more objective that you can specify. So return objective, absolute, relative. However, these return objectives which people talk, okay, is mostly before the taxes, before the fees. Okay, so some people can specify these return objectives pre-tax, that is before the tax. Okay, some people are interested in only seeing how much money they are getting after tax. So it is not good that you are specifying a return objective of 10% after tax, and you are getting 10% pre-tax, because you have to pay tax on that. So after paying tax, you may get only 7% or 8%. So you have to think as to how much you are getting after tax. So many of your clients will say that we want after tax return objective of this much. Okay, now typically this investment management companies, they charge some fees to the client, right? The fees can be from like 1% to 5% or whatever, like depending on the type of product. Let's say it can be from 1% to 5%. Now what the client will say is, okay, so you are giving me a return of 10%, but it is before fee, before taxes. Okay, give me certain return. I want a return 7% after the fee. Okay, I want a return 10% after the fee. Note that you should return 10% after the fee. So that is what you are specifying. So you specify after fee return. There are some clients which specify after fee, after tax return. Okay, so there can be clients. Okay, now some clients have subjective return objective. Remember I said that some client can say that I want to get my daughter married, ensure that after 15 years I have sufficient amount of money so that my daughter will get married, right? So here you will have to compute as to how much the cost of marriage will be after 15 years. You will have to see how much the person is depositing money today, and you have to find out what is the return that you will be calculating. Note that all of these calculations are not a part of level 1. We will be seeing this in your level 3 curriculum. Okay, but you can have a return objective which is subjective in nature. Okay, so this is like, typically it is some, you will specify some achievement of a financial goal, buying a house, buying a car, going for a vacation. All of these are some goals that individuals will mention to you, and you have to ensure that you are meeting that goal. Does return objectives make sense to you? Okay, now what we say is that if you are specifying a return objective which is very high and you are saying that my risk, so some people will say that I don't want to take risk, I don't want to take a risk which is more than Nifty, or I want to take a risk which is half of Nifty, and that guy is saying that I want a return greater than Nifty. Will it be feasible? Okay, so it will not be feasible. So what you have is, okay, if a client says that a client implies that his risk profile is low, that means he doesn't want to take risk, okay, and he specifies that his return objectives are very high, okay. So what you can say to the client is, see, your risk profile and your return objective is not matching. You are one way, you are saying that you want to take risk which is much lower than Nifty, and another way you want to be return which is more than the Nifty. Such is not possible. So what we say is, low risk profile, it means that the return objective should also be low, okay. So what we have to ensure that the return objective, whatever the client has specified, it should be comparable with the risk objective. So you cannot have low risk profile, low risk objective, high return objective, okay. Also you cannot have like a low return objective and high risk objective, okay. Both should be like commensurate, right? So it should be risk and return should be comparable, okay. Now what you can suggest to the client in case of such unrealistic expectation, you have to advise to the client, you have to ensure that the client agrees with you, okay. Because if the client is not agreeing, okay, if the client has this thinking that he can generate a lot of return with taking lower risk, that is not feasible in the market, okay. So the better is that you advise him in the start, okay. And because like if you advise him, if you say to him these things, okay, it will be better for you also, okay. So one thing, like earlier said, that as per CAPM, yes, CAPM, what you are saying is like how much risk you are taking, systematic risk you are getting as per the return. So higher beta, higher return, okay. So that is what we have, risk versus return, it should be comparable. Now let's try to understand some other stuff, that is the risk tolerance. So we have covered the risk tolerance of the institutional investors earlier. Now in risk tolerance, what you have is, you will find in your practice, when you are doing practice, you will find that there are some people who are capable of taking, who are like willing to take a lot of risk, okay, and then there are some people who are not willing to take risk, okay. This is being exhibited because of the investors' attitude, it is because of their belief towards the investment, it is also because of their personality type, okay. So some people are want to take risk, okay, some people, okay, they have like that bent of mind, they want to take risk. Some people are happy with lower risk investment, okay. So that is what you have to identify, that is, you have to identify what is the willingness of the client to take risk, okay. Some clients are willing to take a lot of risk, some clients are not willing to take risk, okay. Now please note that you will see some people who do not have capacity, but they are saying that they are willing to take risk, okay. So you have to also understand, okay, a person is willing to take risk. So let's think about a person who is 70 years old and is living on pension, and his portfolio returns are meeting his day-to-day expenditure, and this guy says to you that I want to take a lot of risk and I want to invest in hedge funds, I want to invest in futures and options, okay. This person does not have the ability to take risk, okay. The willingness does not help, right? Because he may be willing, and if you invest his funds accordingly, okay, you might, like that person will give you a lot of scolding later, because what is happening is the chances of losing money is very high in such type of product. So you have also to identify what is the ability of that person, okay, whether there is ability of that person to take risk, okay. So what you have to understand is, what are the financial circumstances, what are the personal circumstances of the investor, okay. So some people are like phantom, they will say that okay, we want to take risk, but they do not have that ability, they do not have the capacity to take risk. So what we say is, it depends on the personal and the financial circumstances. Typically, if that person 70-year-old, okay, if that was a pensioner and he had not a good amount of wealth, okay, he cannot take risk. But think about a person who has $100 million worth of portfolio, Okay, he is also 70 years old. Okay, now if that person tells you that he want to invest in futures and options, which are risky instrument, okay, you can invest for him. Why? Because he has a lot of wealth. Okay, even if the wealth decreases slightly, he will not have to worry. Okay, he will worry, but what is happening, like you can like over a long period of time you can get his money back, right? So what we say is like wealthy investors have high ability to take the risk. Okay? People done who have been entrepreneur, who have started their own business, okay, who have taken risk in their life, they have high ability. Okay, contrast this with people like who are well educated but they have been in their job throughout their life. Okay, they have not taken risk of their own money. Okay, so what we say is like they have not risked their own money. Okay, so that means they have not started their own business. What they have done is they have done investment in the market. Okay, typically those type of investors, the risk profile is slightly lower, but please note that we are giving a generalistic assumption. There are some people who have been in jobs but they still, the risk appetite is very high. Okay, then as we said that earlier, that long investment horizon typically implies high ability to take the risk. If you have a horizon of 20-30 years, you can take a higher risk, because what happens is in the long period the stock prices, the equity prices, okay, will give a good handsome return. Okay, now investors who need to meet the current income requirement, if you have current income need, if you have liquidity need, you have lower ability to take risk. Even you have a high willingness but you don't have ability to take the risk. So you have to understand the ability requirement, ability of the client. Okay, now what you have to do is you have to map the ability and the willingness. So what we have is you have to map the ability and the willingness. So some people, as I've said, that they have the ability to take risk. You will find that there are many people like this. Let's take an example of a 70-year-old person who has 100 million net worth. He has the ability, but he says that no, I do not want to take risks. So that $100 million, I want to ensure that before I die, I keep this $100 million for my children, or I want to create a trust for the upliftment of poor. Okay, so he might not be willing to take risk. Okay, so whenever you are meeting this kind of situation, okay, one thing is like if you think that the client is becoming unrealistic, he is becoming too much conservative, you advise him. You advise that okay, you have a good capability, only thing is willingness is lesser. Okay, you can take more risk. Okay, if the client understands, then it is good. However, becomes if the client says that no, I do not want to take risk, respect the client. Okay, respect his position, and then you should create the portfolio accordingly. That means you should create portfolio in low risk instrument. Okay, now take the reverse case where we have a 70-year-old person but he has, let's say, only $50,000 of net worth. Okay, and he is using that to meet his current day-to-day expenditure. Okay, and he says that yes, I want to take a lot of risk. Okay, now what you have to say is like you have to advise him that your ability is not there. Okay, if I invest 50,000 in a risky instrument, okay, in a 1 year you can get out of 50,000, it can become $20,000. Okay, that is too less amount to meet your day-to-day need. Okay, so you, rather than that, we should invest in less risky, and we should get promise return, we should get low variability return. So you should advise them. Okay, now if that person is not willing to take your advice, okay, again over here you will not go with the client. Okay, you will go with what his ability is. So what we say is when ability is more, willingness is less. Okay, client is adamant on saying that he doesn't want to take risk, you will respect his willingness. You will say that yes, we will invest in lower risky instrument. Okay, however, if the client has a lot of willingness but he does not have the ability, then we should respect ability. We will not go with the client and say that you are willing, we will invest in risky instrument. No, you are for the benefit of client. Okay, so that is what you have to do. Okay, sometimes they have willingness but not the ability, sometimes they have the ability but not the willingness. So you have to advise the client. Okay, ensure the willingness and ability are compatible. Okay, and once you have got the go ahead, then you have to create a optimal portfolio considering the risk and return for the client. Okay, any question? Okay, so then let's move to the next LOS. The next LOS is investment constraint. So we have seen investment objectives, the objective, return objective. We have seen the tolerance, risk tolerance. The next is we have to understand what are the constraints in an investment. Okay, so there can be lots of constraint. Okay, one constraint is the client wants some liquidity. Okay, so client is interested in getting liquidity. So what he wants is like he should be capable of selling the portfolio, maybe for a requirement for car or a home or for marriage. So these are the constraints. So because of his liquidity need, because he wants a car in 2 years, okay, you cannot invest his portfolio in a high risky instrument. So whatever the amount of money that for the car, you have to. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So liquidity need is if the client wants some money in the near future. Okay, you have to create a portfolio, and okay, you say that okay, you want in money in 2 years. I have to ensure that I have that some sufficient amount of money in low risk instrument. Okay, I do not want to keep that money in a high risk instrument. So you, and as a result what happens is because of this constraint you will not be able to invest in equity securities or higher risk securities. Okay, so typically if there is a liquidity requirement your risk is becoming lesser. Okay, then you have second is time horizon. Okay, what is time horizon? Okay, we have said that if you have long time horizon you have higher capability of taking risk. Okay, now some people have shorter time horizon, some people have longer time horizon. If people have longer time horizon you can invest in long term products. So if you see equity, venture capital, private equity, all of these are typically long term products. Okay, so they have high risk, they have high return, but over a longer period of time they are capable of producing good amount of return. So if the some person have long term time horizon you should invest their money in the long term products. Okay, however some people have a constraint that no that their time horizon is very short. Typically it can be because of liquidity need or because of some other constraint. So such type of investors you should invest in short term products. Typically the short term products are fixed deposits, treasury bills. These are the products for the short term. Okay, so time horizon, okay, is an important constraint. It will determine how you will allocate the portfolio for the client. Okay, then you have tax concern. Okay, so some people are concerned with the taxes, some people are not concerned with the taxes. Typically individual investors, typically there are some institutional investors, they are concerned with the taxes. However there are some institutional investors which are not concerned about the taxes, like endowment, foundation, okay, pension plan. Okay, these are typically tax free entities, they do not have to pay taxes. Okay, now you have to consider the tax requirement of the client and ensure that you are creating portfolio accordingly. Now what happens is there are like various tax laws in different countries. Okay, so if you consider some countries, typically what happens is, okay, there's a tax on income. Okay, and interest is treated as a part of income typically. Okay, then there's a different tax on dividend, there's a different tax on capital gain. Okay, so if you take an example of India, your interest income is charged at whatever slab you are. So think about a person who is at a 30% tax slab, so his interest will be charged at 30% rate. Okay, however dividend is tax free at the hand of investor. Okay, company will have to pay but investor does not have to pay anything for the dividend. The capital gain, if there is a short term capital gain he has to pay 15%. In the long term capital gain for the securities, equities, he will have to pay 0%. Okay, in the long term capital gain 20% he has to pay for securities other than equity. Okay, when he wants inflation indexing, otherwise he has to pay 10%. So what you are seeing is for this investor this is 30%, this is 0, this is 15, 20, 10, depending on the what class of investment it is lying. Okay, so you are working for the benefit of the client, right? So you have to ensure that you take this tax constraint in picture and ensure that you create a portfolio of such asset such that his tax outlay is kind of minimal, because investors are typically interested in getting the after tax return. Okay, so if you invest all his money in interest giving products, he will have to pay a very high tax on those. Okay, so what you can do is, for such type of investor, you can allocate a large amount of stock, a large amount of portfolio in those stocks which are paying dividend, high amount of dividend. He will not have to pay any tax on those. Okay, or you can also look in for those type of products which will give him capital gain. Okay, so what will happen is, you will try to create a portfolio such that the tax outflow is lower. And I'm not saying that you have to just look in only for the tax. Okay, you have to look in for the other constraints. So what you have to do is, like, you have to think of all of these constraints, and then you have to come up with a portfolio. So these constraints you have to think, the risk tolerance you have to think, ability you have to think, return you have to think. So all of this you have to consider, and then you have to create a portfolio. So what happens is, different investments have different tax requirement, or tax payment has to be done. So ensure that you take that into consideration. Okay, any doubt over here in the tax? Okay, now let's see the next factor, which is the legal and regulatory factor. Okay, typically this legal and regulatory factor is not much of a concern for individual investor. However, this legal and regulatory factor is too much of concern for institutional investor. Remember, I said that banks and insurance companies are heavily regulated, right? So what happens is, in India, the general insurance companies, okay, they cannot invest more than 10% in equities. Okay, so they cannot invest more than 10%. So what you have is, these are regulatory requirement that they cannot invest more than 10% in equity. So whenever you are trying to come up with the asset allocation for such type of companies, you have to ensure that you are meeting the government requirement. Banks, right? Banks have to ensure that a certain portion of their money is invested in government bond. Okay, so you have to ensure that you are meeting all of these criteria. Okay, and then you are coming up with the portfolio. So these are the constraint on the portfolio, not more than 10%. Maybe 25% of your money should be in the government bond. Okay, so such type of requirement, such type of constraint will force you to adhere to this, and as a result, you may not be able to create a very optimal portfolio. But what we say is, like, your portfolio will be optimal considering these constraints in nature. Okay, then some clients will have unique need. Okay, typically it is applicable for individual investors. So they have some unique needs and preferences. So what they have is, like, the clients say that we do not want investment in alcohol company, we do not want investment in tobacco company, or they may say that we do not want investment in those companies which are polluting the environment. So such type of prohibition will be there. So you have to ensure that you adhere to the requirements given by the client. This is his need, this is his preference. Okay, you have to ensure that the portfolio is invested in according to his wishes. Okay, now if you see recently, like, you are seeing, like, Islamic finance is in very much popularity, right? So there, like, you cannot take interest, okay, as a source of income. You cannot invest in those products which will give interest. Okay, so remember, in case of ETF, I had shown you that Sharia index. So Sharia index is like considering other factors also. That means you cannot invest in portfolio in the stock of those companies which are alcohol companies. So what you have is, like, this is a need of some institutional also. They have this need, that is, they want to invest in certain stocks which is adhering to this type of requirement. Okay, make sure that you are adhering to this. Okay, one more thing can happen is, think about a person, okay, who has a company, okay, who has his own company, listed company, and he has let's say, take example of Mukesh Ambani, right? He has 40% of his he has a 40% of ownership of Reliance. Okay, maybe 95% of his wealth will be in the form of Reliance stock, right? So what you have is, for that particular investor, you cannot say that I will create a diversified portfolio for you, because that is not achievable, frankly, because he has 95% stock in of his wealth in Reliance stock. You cannot sell his Reliance stock. When you sell his Reliance stock, people will say that, okay, why Mukesh Ambani is selling his stock? Okay, maybe like the prospect of the company is not good. So such type of scenario, their diversification may not be achievable. Okay, so you have to respect this and you have to create the portfolio considering these constraints. Okay, so what we call as these are the investment constraints, and you can remember this LTTLU. Okay, so what I say is long term liability for you, okay, or long term taxes and liability for you. You can remember like this, or whatever mnemonic you can think of, because the questions that will be coming from these two readings will be theoretical in nature. Okay, and you have to remember whatever we have discussed. So you will be shown a profile of a person, and you will have to, okay, you will have to tell that person's, okay, you will have to tell what are the requirements of the person, what are the needs of the person. You will have to accordingly advise. You have to see, also tell whether the person wants to take higher risk, whether the person wants to take lower risk. All this you have to mention. Okay, so please be prepared to solve those kind of questions. Be prepared to answer theoretical questions in these two readings. Okay, next we will be covering two LOS combined, that is asset allocation and the principle of portfolio construction. Okay, so we have tried to cover some little bit over here. Okay, that is, in asset allocation we will be creating a strategic asset allocation for the client. We'll say that, okay, for the client, considering all the return objective, risk objective, the constraint, the risk that the client wants to take, I have come up with a certain strategic asset allocation for the client. I have created debt to be 40, I have created equity to be 60. So this is the strategic asset allocation for the client, and we will ensure that we will be having investments, okay, in this. Okay, however, we have seen that there can be deviation. Okay, and what we say is, whatever the deviation comes because of the different returns in allocation, we will be removing that by rebalancing the portfolio. So whenever there is a deviation, so we have a rebalancing policy, and as per this policy we will ensure that the portfolio is rebalanced to this strategic asset allocation level. Okay, now there are two things in asset allocation. One is strategic asset allocation, another thing you have is tactical asset allocation. Now do you have an understanding of what is tactical asset allocation? Okay, so think about strategic asset allocation takes longer term into consideration. So maybe like if your investor has come, so you will take into consideration his long-term goals. Okay, you will take into consideration his long-term liquidity needs. Okay, and then you will create this strategic asset allocation. However, you will also specify in the in the IPS that this is my strategic asset allocation, but in certain situation, depending on the expectation of the market or market expectation, the fund manager can change the allocation in the portfolio. The fund manager can change this allocation, and what you are saying is that is tactical asset allocation. So what we say is, like, if the asset manager thinks that the equity market is overvalued, okay, the equity can be brought down to 20% of the total portfolio. Okay, but it will not be less than 20%. We can bring down to 20% of the portfolio. Okay, and that can go as high as 80% of the portfolio depending on the market situation. Okay, this can, here just I have given 20%. Okay, it can be 0% also. So depending on the market situation, we can bring down to 0%, and this we can bring up to 100%. So tactical asset allocation considers the short-term expectation of the market. The strategic asset allocation considers a long-term market expectation, the risk objective, return objective, the constraints. It also considers the type of risk that the risk tolerance of the client. Okay, however, the tactical asset allocation is kind of a technical decision. It is a short-term decision. In the short term, you will deviate from the strategic asset allocation, okay, depending on the expectation that you have in the market. Okay, so tactical asset allocation also you will have to specify what is the allocation in case when you have certain changes. So you will specify that, okay, in tactical asset allocation we can move this way. Okay, next is your security selection. Okay, so when we are constructing a portfolio, okay, so what is happening is, when you are constructing a portfolio, if you Yes, you have to mention all of these things in the policy. Okay, in fact, tactical asset allocation should be mentioned in the policy. Okay, now think about what we are trying to cover is security selection over here. So when you are considering the portfolio of the client, okay, so what you have is the portfolio, and you have debt, you have equity. Now, when you are investing in the equity, what you have is you have various approaches. One is top-down approach, okay, and another is bottom-up approach. Okay, we'll cover all of this in equity, but let's say you are trying to cover top-down approach. That means you will see the situation of the economy, and according to the economy situation, you will say that okay, which are the sectors which are doing good. So you will have sector 1, you will have sector 2. Let's say you have the sector IT sector, you think that real estate will do well, okay, you will think that the bank will do well. So what you have is you will have, depending on the market expectation, you will create the various sectors in which you will be allocating your portfolio. So you have 60% in equity, you will say that okay, I will invest 20% in IT, I will invest 30% in real estate, I will invest 50% in bank. Okay, now because you are thinking that these three sectors will outperform other sectors. Okay, now once you have identified the sectors, what you have to do is you have to now find out which securities are good in this sector. So you'll say that okay, in IT I will be investing in TCS stock, in IT I have good stock as Wipro, so and I have good stock as let's say HCL. Okay, so we'll be investing in these three stocks, and out of this whatever 100% of the IT allocation, I will invest 30% in TCS, I'll invest 20% in Wipro, and I'll invest 50% in HCL. Okay, so this is what you have. So how you will determine this, whether to invest in TCS or not? So you will see the performance of TCS, you will build the expectation of TCS as to how the TCS stock would be doing in near future, and then you will be allocating the TCS stock to the client's portfolio. So what you have is you have portfolio, okay, then you have in portfolio the asset class. In the asset class you can have the sectors. In the sectors you ultimately come down to the securities that you will be investing. So same way will happen in debt. So in the debt you can have okay, I will be investing in government bond, I will be investing in corporate bond, and let's say in government bond, okay, what are the type of government bonds are there? I want to invest in long-term bond, I want to invest in short-term bond. You will allocate accordingly. So what we have is once you have determined the allocation, okay, next task is to come up with the capital market expectation and arrive at the security selection. Okay, because ultimately you have to invest, right? So you have to invest in these stocks, so you will have to arrive at which stock you will be investing. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, so that is what it meant. So what we are having is, so you have asset allocation. Once you have allocated the asset, you will be investing in the security, so you will be doing security selection. Okay, now what we have is you have what is the importance of asset allocation. So if you see, like from the starting, I am like kind of focusing on asset allocation. Okay, remember that statistically or historically it has been seen that asset allocation, okay, if it is being done properly, okay, it is capable of explaining a high percentage of the return of the portfolio. So what we see is if the strategic asset allocation is done properly, the asset allocation determines 90% of the portfolio return. Okay, so strategic asset allocation determines 90% of the return of the portfolio. Okay, and also what they say is that market timing. Okay, the timing, like many people will say that okay, buy now, sell tomorrow, buy tomorrow, sell day after. Okay, what has been seen that market timing doesn't make a lot of difference. So 90% of the return of the portfolio return is being determined by strategic asset allocation. Market timing is not that important. Okay, okay, what we see is, as a result, what we also see is that asset selection is more important than security selection. So if you have identified the asset properly, so if you have said that okay, based on this guy's requirement I have 40 debt, 60 equity, okay, this is much more important than what you are getting at the end, because what happens is this is a larger chunk. Okay, and let's say you have done some mistake and misappropriately you have allocated in TCS. Okay, so you will have like stocks like TCS, you will have 20-30 stocks in the portfolio. Okay, the impact of TCS would be very less. Okay, the idea is to diversify across the equities, right, across the securities. So what you see is that this allocation is a major item, okay, as compared to the security selection. Okay, so what we say is allocation explains 90% of the return produced by the portfolio. Timing does not make much difference. Asset selection is more important than security selection. That means how much you will be investing in equities, how much you will be investing in debt. Okay, so I have couple of questions. One question from Mr. Gulati is that what is a bottom up approach? Okay, again we will see this later in equities, but in bottom up approach what you will do is you will directly do analysis on your securities. Let's say you have you will directly analyze, okay, how the TCS fundamental looks like, how HCL fundamental looks like, how SBI fundamental looks like. Okay, so you will be seeing this company's balance sheet, profit and loss. Okay, and then okay you will see, okay, I think TCS looks good to me. Okay, now you will say, okay, TCS looks good. Now what is the perspective of the IT sector? Okay, so is the perspective of IT sector good or bad? So accordingly you will take a decision to invest in TCS. So this type of investment is typically done through, you will create certain filters. So you will say, okay, I will filter down on the basis of P ratio, PV ratio, growth rate, all of these various parameters. You will be selecting the stocks based on that, and also you will be finding out the value. So all of that we will be learning in the equity part, which is your session number 13 and 14. In fact, like in 14 we will learn all of these things. Okay, then I have one more question. Okay, so Aditya says that 90% of the actual return. So SAA has been capable of explaining 90% of the actual return. Okay, so it has been historically seen across the clients. It has been seen that SAA determines the return. Okay, so that is why whenever you are creating your own portfolio, your client's portfolio, try to focus on the asset allocation. Okay, so for asset allocation it is very important to understand the return, risk objective. Okay, have a compatibility between this, understand the risk tolerance, understand the constraint, and then come up with the asset allocation. If the asset allocation is done fine, okay, what will happen is even if you do mistake in security selection, okay, it will not impact much. Okay, so that is why many people say that we should invest passively. So idea is to get equities. Okay, let's say you have got 40% debt, 60% equity. What they say is like invest entire 60% equity in passive funds. Okay, so because what they're saying, security selection will not matter much. Okay, so if you are investing in passive funds, your cost is lesser. Okay, your returns are roughly the market return. As a result, okay, your portfolio will do well. Okay, so this was a topic that we had to cover. Okay, very theoretical topic, but yes, from the important from the examination point it is very important. Okay, so one more question we have, that is market timing does make difference if investing in equities. Okay, now what we are saying is like even in equities investing, what we say is nobody will be able to time the market perfectly. If you are able to time the market 100% of the time, 90% of the time, or 80% of the time, you will do well. However, what we say is it's a probability, right? So you will not be able to time the market. Okay, so take example, like I thought that so market started for, so our questions, yeah, so questions will be theoretical. So think about like you are not able to time the market properly, because let's say like market started falling from October 2010. Okay, so like I was seeing that okay, market was coming very high, maybe like in September month I saw that it was very high. Okay, I shorted the market that time, around 5800 was the Nifty that time. Okay, but it went till 6300. Okay, suffered lots of losses. Okay, but ultimately the market, you saw that it came to 4500. Okay, so it is not possible to time the market. Okay, you will do some error in timing the market, you will lose when you are not able to time the market properly. Okay, now think about if some person would have sold the market at exactly at 6300, bought at 4500, he would have made a lot of money. Okay, but like if market was at 4500, people were saying it will go down, so you will not buy this. So like how to identify bottom properly, how to identify top properly, that is your market timing. And these are, I will say that, more of a guesswork rather than having a kind of sound theoretical foundation. Okay, many people they are able to do, but again, like we are not sure whether it's like by their luck or by their capability. Technicals, they do help, but if you see long over a long period of time, okay, technical analysis also, they what in technical analysis people say that okay, if it breaches this resistance level it will go up. Okay, what if it does not breach the level, it will go down. Okay, now what you cannot say that, okay, again I will say that maybe the probability is higher, but you still have chances of making losses. Okay, so the market timing consistently people will not be able to do. As a result, what we say is market timing does not help much. Okay. Okay. So Ali is asking, indexes are prior to blue chips for security analysis. What is the criteria of selection if ETFs and stocks and index? Okay. So it's not that indexes are only blue chips. You have small cap index. Okay. So you have like a index for small cap companies. If you are creating a portfolio for a small cap index, your reference should be the index that you should be referring as a benchmark should be your small cap index. Okay, for security selection, what you have to understand is, okay, you have lots and lots of options available. You have to think about the return, you have to think about the risk, you have to think about the cost. These are the three things you have to think, and then you have to make an investment. Of course, like you have to think about the asset allocation. Now what we say is, like if you are a passive investor, okay, you might be tempted to invest in ETF because the ETFs, the cost structure of ETF is very less. Okay, imagine like I have only 500 rupees to invest, right? I can invest in one stock. Okay, but what happens is that stock has high risk. What I can do is I can invest in ETF which is called as Nifty Bees. Okay, if you see this Nifty Bees over here, you can buy I think at around 500. So you can buy Nifty Bees at 523. With only 500 rupees you are able to get a complete diversification. Okay, see, the innovation in finance has helped lots of people, right? So a normal people, let's say a auto rickshaw driver, if he wants to invest only 1000 rupee a month or 500 rupee a month, he can peacefully invest in this ETF. Okay, and he can get a complete diversification. He does not have to worry about too much of risk because Nifty is kind of a very diversified 50 stock portfolio, very diversified, 23 sectors that is being represented. So he can invest in such type of ETF. So what happens is you have to think that whether you want to go passively, cost is a constraint. So then you can take a decision to invest in index. Okay, typically index investment cannot be done by normal people because if you want to invest in Nifty directly, you have to buy that 50 stocks. Okay, and it might entail some 1 crore 2 crore investment. Okay, so best way for a normal investor like us will be to get a diversification through a ETF. Okay, you can invest in stock if you are very sure of your analysis. Okay, you think that stock is good, you can invest. Okay, does that answer your question, Ali?